You ever have one of those moments where life doesn't just kick you in the teeth, it kicks you, checks your pockets for loose change, and leaves a handwritten note about how you really brought it on yourself? That was me, standing in the drizzle at 1 a.m., suitcase in hand, staring at the front door of my childhood home. Or, more accurately, what used to be my childhood home before my family decided to treat it like a petty reality show elimination round. The first clue was the lock. I'd landed an hour ago from a red-eye business trip, exhausted and daydreaming about my lumpy mattress and a microwaved burrito. But the key, my key, the one that had worked for 28 years, hit the metal with a dull, traitorous clunk. I tried again, more forcefully, like the lock would recognize desperation and take pity. No such luck. I took a step back, squinting in the porch light. That's when I saw it, a neat stack of my belongings dumped unceremoniously on the wet lawn. My duffel bag, the one with the busted zipper. A sagging box labeled James, Miscellaneous. My old laptop bag, still with a fading company sticker. The cheap wooden chair I'd rescued from a neighbor's trash. All of it sitting there like a yard sale nobody wanted. But the real masterpiece? A single sheet of printer paper taped to the door. Reflect on your actions. I let out a short laugh. Not because it was funny, God, no, but because the sheer absurdity was so perfect it felt scripted. Reflect on my actions. As if I'd stolen their car or burned down the kitchen, instead of, what? Asking them to stop bleeding me dry? 2 weeks earlier, I dared, like some ungrateful little serf, to suggest we scale back on expenses. That maybe, if I was expected to cover the mortgage and Ryan's student loans and Dad's credit card emergencies, perhaps Mom could ease off the twice-weekly hair appointments and Ryan could, I don't know, get a job that didn't involve consulting on Instagram. You'd think I'd proposed pulling the plug on a beloved family pet. There'd been yelling, mostly from my mother, who accused me of abandoning the family legacy. Ryan's favorite line was that I was flexing because I'd finally gotten promoted. As if I'd been waiting for the chance to rub my meager success in their faces. I hadn't spoken to them since. Not because I was punishing them, though God knows they deserved it, but because I needed space to figure out whether my entire life had been an elaborate con designed to keep me compliant. But I guess they'd decided to skip the reconciliation phase and jump straight to the exile. I should have felt humiliated. Once upon a time, I would have. The old me would have called, apologized, promised to pick up extra shifts. But standing there in the wet grass, suitcase handles slick in my grip, all I felt was a weird, hollow calm. Like something important inside me had finally died, and left room for something better. I crouched and picked up the box labeled Miscellaneous. It was heavier than I remembered. I set it in the trunk of my car and worked methodically through the pile, one item at a time. Not because I was in a hurry, there was nowhere to go at that hour, but because I knew that when I drove away, it would be the last time I'd ever stand in that yard as a supplicant. Halfway through loading my things, I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over my mother's number. For a split second, the old reflex flared, call her, smooth it over, play the part. Instead, I scrolled to Michael's contact. My best friend since college. The one person who'd seen how bad it got. Hey, I said when he answered, his voice thick with sleep. You still have that storage unit? He didn't even ask why. Just told me he'd meet me there in an hour. By the time I shut the trunk, my hair was plastered to my forehead, my shoes were soaked through, and I was tired in a way that had nothing to do with travel. But underneath the exhaustion, there was a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years, resolve. They wanted me to reflect on my actions. Fine. I would. And when I was done, they wouldn't recognize the man looking back at them. The thing about betrayal is it doesn't usually arrive like a lightning strike. It seeps in over years, tiny, repeated dismissals you learn to pretend don't hurt until you can't tell the difference between loyalty and surrender. My training in that started young. I used to think every family was like ours. That every oldest kid watched the younger one get everything, while he learned to swallow his questions and call it love. My parents didn't even bother hiding it. They wore their favoritism openly, like a comfortable old sweater. When Ryan turned 8, he got a brand new mountain bike, chrome handlebars, his name painted across the frame. I got his hand-me-down with a rusted chain and Dork, scratched into the seat in permanent marker. My dad just patted my shoulder. Not everything has to be new. It wasn't only the birthdays. It was Christmas, too. Ryan's gifts came in glossy paper and big satin bows. Mine were stuffed into supermarket bags. Even as a kid, I could feel that difference, like the universe kept a ledger where my column never added up. When I was 17, I asked for help paying my college deposit. Just a little, enough to cover the gap after scholarships and 2 jobs at the grocery store. My mother pressed her lips together, her eyes drifting over to Ryan sprawled across the couch with a new gaming laptop. "You know we're stretched thin," she said, voice syrupy with false regret. "Your brother's needs come first." I remember staring at her, willing her to look back at me and realize how absurd it was. She didn't. My father didn't either. "You're smart, James," he said. "You'll figure it out." And I did. I learned to stop asking for things I knew I wouldn't get. I learned to measure love in half gestures and small allowances. I told myself maybe that was enough. When I graduated community college with honors, they didn't come to the ceremony. "Can you believe the timing?" my mom said over the phone. "Ryan's championship game is that day. I swear the universe is testing us." Sure. Testing them. I stood in my borrowed graduation gown in the bathroom mirror, adjusting the cheap tassel. It was the first time I understood that disappointment wasn't the exception. It was the foundation. After that, I became the fallback plan. The backup adult. The silent ATM. When Ryan's car broke down, I was the one they called. When Dad forgot the mortgage payment, it was me wiring the money. Every time, I told myself it was temporary. That someday, I'd be seen as more than a resource. But standing in Michael's storage unit at 3 a.m., stacking the last box on a steel shelf, I finally admitted to myself that day was never coming. Michael leaned against the doorway, arms folded. He didn't say anything right away. He didn't have to. He'd been there through all the calls, all the excuses, all the, "James, you're our rock. You okay?" he asked eventually. I looked at the pile of damp boxes, my whole life reduced to a stack of things nobody wanted, and felt a flicker of something I didn't recognize. Relief. "No," I said. "But I think maybe that's the point." Michael nodded slowly. "About time." We locked the unit, and as the door rattled shut, I felt a quiet certainty settle in my chest. They taught me how to endure. But they also taught me exactly what I never wanted to be. By the time I was 21, I'd perfected the art of making excuses for them. "They're just stressed. They don't mean it. It's not that big a deal." I told myself those things so often, I almost believed them. Almost. That summer, I finally did something just for me. I worked 2 jobs, skipped every night out, and hoarded every dollar until I could book a cheap week at a beach motel 3 hours away. Nothing fancy, just 4 walls and the ocean outside my window. The idea of it felt decadent. The night before I left, I packed a paperback, a second-hand swimsuit, and a little slip of paper on which I'd written a promise to myself: no obligations. No guilt. I lasted 2 days. On the 3rd morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing against the nightstand. My mother's number. Before I could think better of it, I answered. "James," she said, sounding bright and breezy. "You won't believe this. We decided to come down for the week. Isn't that funny?" My stomach turned. "Come down where?" I asked, though I already knew. "The beach," she chirped. "Ryan and Sarah and the kids, oh, and your father, of course. We thought it'd be nice to have a family getaway. You can help with the little ones. They're so excited to see their uncle." I pressed my palm against my eye, fighting the urge to hang up. "You didn't ask," I said, voice flat. "Well," she said, sounding suddenly offended, "it's not like you own the place." It was the same old script. My plans didn't matter. My space didn't matter. If they decided I was needed, that was the end of the conversation. By the afternoon, they were there, carrying bags, trailing beach toys, commandeering the tiny kitchen. Ryan clapped me on the back like we were old pals. "Thanks for setting this up, man," he said, as if I'd invited them. "You can watch the boys tonight, right? Sarah and I want to get dinner." I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. And then, just like always, I nodded. That night, I sat on the motel balcony with my knees pulled up to my chest while the boys slept inside. My family was at a beachfront steakhouse, toasting to a vacation I'd paid for and never consented to. I don't know when the shift happened, when the quiet resentment stopped being background noise and became something solid. Maybe it was when Ryan texted me a photo of his ribeye, captioned "Living Our Best Lives." Maybe it was when my mother called to say she charged a meal to my room. "Since you're working now." All I know is that by the time dawn broke, I was done. I packed my bag in silence, slipped out the door with my sneakers in my hand. The parking lot was empty except for my dented Corolla. I slid into the driver's seat and sat there for a full minute, heart hammering, waiting to feel guilt. It didn't come. I drove home without leaving a note. A small rebellion, sure. But in that moment, it felt like the biggest thing I'd ever done for myself. By the time I turned 25, I was fluent in a language I'd never chosen to learn, the dialect of obligation. Every call started the same. "We were just thinking of you." The preamble to a new demand. It was always something. A loan. Just for a month. An emergency that turned out to be Ryan forgetting to pay a bill. A vacation that somehow required me to watch the kids while everyone else relaxed. I kept saying yes because saying no always ended the same way: cold silences, guilt-laden sighs, and lectures about how I was selfish. But that year, on my birthday, I got an email that finally snapped the thread. Subject line: "Happy birthday. Surprise trip." I opened it, stomach already tight. Inside was an itinerary: flights, hotel rooms, car rental. All booked in my name. My mother's message was short. "We're taking the kids to Disney. It'll be so special to have you there to help out. Don't worry, we used your points to cover most of it." It wasn't even a question. Just another assumption that my time, and my money, were community property. I sat there for a long time, reading it over and over. The old reflex to rationalize started rising: it's just how they are. They don't mean anything by it. But this time, something else surfaced instead. I don't owe them this. Still, I boarded the flight. Habit is a powerful thing. I told myself I'd survive it like I always did, grit my teeth, pretend it was fine. At the gate, Ryan was sprawled across 3 chairs, complaining to the gate agent that he couldn't get upgraded. My mother was scrolling through hotel reviews, muttering about the room sizes. My father was on a call about something he'd forgotten to pay. Nobody looked up when I sat down. I stared at my boarding pass, feeling like the air around me was getting thinner. It struck me that if I got on that plane, nothing would ever change. I'd be 40, 50, still the same fallback plan. The designated rescuer. The unpaid help. And suddenly, I just couldn't do it anymore. I picked up my carry-on and walked to the other end of the terminal. My heart was hammering. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone when I opened the airline app. There was a flight to Denver leaving in 40 minutes. 1 seat left. I booked it without hesitating. My phone buzzed, 3 texts from my mother, then a call. I watched it ring, feeling a strange, detached curiosity at how calm I was. I didn't answer. Instead, I texted Michael, "Coming to Denver. Need a place to land for a few days." His reply came in less than a minute: "I'll pick you up." I looked back across the terminal. My family was still there, unaware. Ryan was now harassing a different employee. My mother was probably about to start looking for me to carry the bags. I didn't owe them an explanation. I turned off my phone. At the gate for Denver, a young couple was arguing quietly. A businessman in a suit was tapping away at his laptop. None of them knew I was doing the bravest thing I'd ever done. I boarded early. Found my window seat. Fastened the belt with hands that were steadier than I'd expected. As the engines roared to life, I imagined my mother's face when she realized I was gone. Ryan's outrage. My father's disappointed sighs. Let them feel it. Let them sit in the discomfort they'd forced on me my entire life. When the plane lifted off the ground, I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath. I wasn't sure what waited for me in Denver. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to find out. Denver felt like a different planet. Michael met me at arrivals with 2 coffees and that steady, uncomplicated way he has of making everything feel less dire. He didn't ask why I'd shown up unannounced, dragging a suitcase and the wreckage of my family's expectations behind me. He just hugged me hard and said, "You're safe here." And for a while I was. The first few weeks blurred together: cheap takeout, long walks in Michael's neighborhood, hours of sleep I hadn't known I needed. I called into work, took a personal leave, and spent the mornings reading in his spare bedroom with the door shut, feeling more peace than I'd ever let myself imagine. When I finally turned my phone back on, there were 47 missed calls and a tidal wave of texts. My mother's messages were the usual cocktail of guilt and condescension. Ryan's were worse, lines of pure venom about how I was a coward, how I'd ruined everything, how I'd embarrassed them. I didn't respond. 3 months passed. Then 6. I found a cheap apartment, finished my degree online, and landed a marketing job that didn't expect me to sacrifice every last shred of myself. For the first time, my life felt like mine. But entitlement has a long memory. It was almost exactly 3 years later when the calls started again, this time from an unknown number. I ignored them until Michael texted me a screenshot of a voicemail he'd gotten by mistake. My mother's voice. Panicked. "James, please, we need your help. The house is in foreclosure. Your father, he's sick, he can't handle the stress. We just need a little support to get back on track." I listened to it twice, feeling the old ache in my ribs. Support. Not accountability. Never accountability. 2 days later, they showed up in person. I came home from work to find them sitting on the steps of my building, older, thinner, somehow smaller. My mother stood first. "James," she breathed, like she was relieved I hadn't disappeared entirely. "We have to talk." I didn't invite them up. I sat down on the concrete opposite them. They told me everything in that carefully edited way they always had. How the mortgage had fallen behind. How Ryan's investments had collapsed. How they were facing lawsuits, collections, ruin. "And you thought I'd save you?" I said quietly. "You're our son," my mother said, her voice breaking. "We know we made mistakes, but we're family." I looked at her, then at my father, his hands shaking on his knees, eyes fixed on the ground. Family. That word again. The same word they'd used to justify every sacrifice they'd ever demanded. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I said. My father cleared his throat. "Cover the mortgage, just until we sort things out. Help Ryan stabilize his accounts. It's not forever." I let the silence stretch long enough that my mother started to fidget. "I'll consider it," I said finally. "But only under one condition." Relief flashed across her face. "Anything. I want everything in writing," I said. "Every account. Every debt. Every payment. No more secrets. No more surprises. If I'm going to help, it's going to be on my terms, and it will be fully documented." My father flinched like I'd slapped him. "You don't trust us?" I didn't bother pretending. "No." My mother's lip trembled. For the first time, I thought she might actually apologize. But instead, she just looked tired. "Fine," she whispered. "If that's what it takes." "Good," I said, standing. "Then bring me the paperwork. All of it. And we'll see if this can be salvaged." I went upstairs without hugging them. When I closed the door behind me, I exhaled slowly. I felt no guilt. Only a quiet certainty that if they wanted my help, they'd have to meet me in reality. It took them 3 weeks to pull together the paperwork. 3 weeks of carefully worded emails and strained phone calls, each one ending the same way, my mother's voice soft and tired, like this was all happening to her by accident. While I waited, I tried to pretend it didn't matter anymore. I worked late. I went to the gym. I spent evenings with Michael, who never once told me what I should do. But no matter how hard I tried, the old doubts crept in around the edges. Maybe this time it's different. Maybe they really do want to change. The envelope finally arrived on a Wednesday. I came home to find it propped against my door, thick enough that the flap was tearing. Inside was a mess of statements and overdue notices, mortgage delinquencies, credit card balances, collection threats. I sat on the floor, reading every page. I thought I'd feel triumphant, finally seeing the proof of what I'd suspected for years. But all I felt was this hollow, exhausted ache. They'd spent decades insisting everything was fine, that I was overreacting, that Ryan's ventures were just a temporary setback. But here it was in black and white, proof that the life they built was a castle of sand, waiting for the tide. I was still holding the last statement when Michael's text came in. "Check your messages," he'd written. "You need to see this." I swiped over and felt my stomach tighten. It was a screenshot from Ryan's Facebook. A selfie of Ryan and my mother standing in front of a realtor's sign that read "Sold." The caption was short but smug. "Sometimes you have to let go of dead weight. Grateful for fresh starts. Haters can watch from the sidelines." Haters. I read it 3 times, each word a spark in the dry grass of my patience. This was who they really were. Not scared. Not humbled. Just arrogant enough to assume I'd still come running to fix it all. I leaned back against the wall, the envelopes slipping out of my hand. My apartment was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock over the kitchen. I thought about every time I'd sacrificed, birthdays missed, trips cancelled, rent delayed so I could wire them another last bailout. And for what? So they could stand there grinning while I played the fool. I closed my eyes and let the anger settle. Not the hot, frantic anger that made you lash out. The cold, steady kind that made you precise. When I opened them again, I knew exactly what I had to do. I picked up my phone and called Michael. "Remember when you said I was too nice for my own good?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "Yeah. You finally ready to prove me wrong?" I stared at the screenshot one more time. My mother's smile. Ryan's lazy confidence. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think I am." That night, I opened my laptop and pulled up Marcus Thorne's contact. He wasn't the kind of lawyer you called unless you were ready to draw a line you couldn't walk back over. His reply landed in my inbox the next morning. Simple, clinical, and devastating. If I wanted to, I could buy the delinquent mortgage before foreclosure completed. Quietly. Legally. By the time the dust settled, I'd be their new landlord. It wasn't revenge. It was consequence. I didn't decide right away. I let it sit in my inbox all weekend. I made coffee. I went for long walks. I imagined every outcome: Ryan's rage, my mother's disbelief, my father's inevitable accusation that I was betraying them. And then, Sunday night, I sat down at my kitchen table with the lights off and the city humming outside my window. I thought about the boy who used to believe any sacrifice was worth a little love. And I realized he was gone. They wanted me to reflect on my actions. I had. And I finally understood. I didn't owe them my life just because they'd given me theirs. Once I made the decision, everything moved faster than I expected. Marcus worked with the calm precision of someone who'd done this dozens of times. By Monday afternoon, he'd already filed the initial purchase paperwork on the delinquent mortgage. It felt surreal. For years, I'd been the one sending emergency payments like some kind of living insurance policy. Now, I was the one pulling the levers. While the legal process churned on, I went back to work like nothing had changed. My coworkers had no idea I spent my lunch breaks signing contracts that would turn my entire family dynamic inside out. At night, I sat in my apartment and read the paperwork over and over, half convinced I'd wake up to find it was all a mistake. But each page was solid. Binding. Real. The final sale went through on a Thursday morning. The email from Marcus was as simple as it was final. "Congratulations. You are now the lien holder of record." I set my phone down on the kitchen table and stared at it. I'd thought I'd feel vindicated, maybe even triumphant. But all I felt was an odd, quiet certainty, like I'd finally stepped into the life I should have been living all along. 2 hours later, Ryan tried to call. I didn't answer. Then he tried again. And again. By the 4th attempt, he'd switched tactics, voicemails laced with fake concern, Hey man, just checking in. No hard feelings about the paperwork, right? We should all sit down. Work this out. I didn't reply. That evening, I walked into Marcus's office for our final meeting. It was one of those modern spaces with polished concrete floors and too many plants. He greeted me with the same measured calm he always had. You're sure about this? He asked. Yes, I said. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of the foreclosure transfer, notices of default, and a prepared document inviting the former owners, my parents, to meet with the new lien holder. Me. I'd suggest you deliver it formally, Marcus said. It's cleaner that way. I nodded. My pulse was steady, almost disappointingly so. Before I left, Marcus looked me straight in the eye. Just be prepared, he said quietly. People don't handle losing leverage gracefully. He wasn't wrong. The next day, Ryan showed up at my building. I only knew because the security desk called up. There's a man here insisting you're expecting him, the guard said, sounding vaguely amused. I pictured Ryan in the lobby, arms crossed, mouth already half open with some practiced insult. Tell him I'm unavailable, I said. And if he tries to wait, have him removed. I didn't feel guilt. Not even for a second. Later that afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table and slid the notice of meeting into an envelope. My hands didn't shake. They'd spent years treating my help as a guarantee. An unspoken contract that I'd sacrificed so they wouldn't have to. Now they were going to learn the contract was void. I scheduled the meeting for the following week. A neutral conference room at Marcus's office. 1 hour. No negotiation. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, trying to remember the last time I'd felt so clear. They told me to reflect on my actions. This was the reflection, the moment I stopped being their backup plan, and became the architect of my own life. The morning of the meeting dawned gray and cold. I dressed carefully, dark slacks, a clean white shirt, the watch I'd bought myself after my first promotion. Not because I wanted to impress them, but because I wanted to remind myself that I didn't belong to the version of me they still pictured. Marcus's conference room was glass-walled and quiet, with a long table that looked more like a surgical theater than a place for conversation. He greeted me with a short nod, his expression giving nothing away. You ready? He asked. Yes, I said. The door opened precisely on time. My mother walked in first, shoulders squared, her mouth pressed into a thin line. Ryan followed, eyes darting around the room, searching for something, maybe an exit. My father brought up the rear, silent, his gaze fixed on the floor. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Marcus gestured to the chairs. Please! Sit! They did, stiff and wary. My mother was the first to find her voice. James, she began, her tones sweet and brittle. This isn't necessary. We're family. I didn't answer. I slid the envelope across the table, the notice of foreclosure transfer peeking from the flap. Her hand trembled when she picked it up. What is this? She whispered. The deed, I said evenly. The mortgage you defaulted on. It belongs to me now. Ryan made a strangled sound. My father's face went pale. You bought it? He asked, as if he couldn't wrap his mind around it. I did. For a moment, nobody moved. I could hear my own heart beating in my chest, steady as a metronome. Ryan was the first to snap. You think this makes you better than us? He spat. Some big power play? You're pathetic. I turned my gaze to him, steady and unblinking. Do you remember that photo you posted? I asked quietly. His mouth opened, then shut. My mother looked confused. I pulled out my phone and set it face up on the table, Ryan and her, smiling under the realtor's sign. Sometimes you have to let go of dead weight. My mother paled. Ryan shifted in his chair, looking everywhere but at me. I was the dead weight, I said. And now I'm the one deciding whether you stay in that house. My father finally looked up, his voice rough. James, you don't have to do this. No, I agreed. I don't. But I will. I took a slow breath. The next words came out calm, almost gentle. I'm offering you a lease at market rate. You'll pay on time in full or you'll vacate. There will be no more loans. No more bailouts. No more pretending this family is something it's not. My mother's eyes filled with tears. You're punishing us, she whispered. I shook my head. No, I said. I'm protecting myself. Ryan shoved back from the table, his chair screeching across the floor. This is bullshit, he snapped. You think you're some kind of hero? You're a coward with a checkbook. I didn't respond. I just watched him with that same quiet clarity that had carried me through every sleepless night and every empty promise. You have until the end of the week to decide, I said finally. After that, the terms expire. Marcus slid copies of the lease across the table. My parents didn't touch them. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and looked at them one last time. This was your choice, I said. Not mine. And then I walked out, the conference room door clicking shut behind me. I stepped into the cold morning air and felt something I couldn't name, something too big for relief, too final for triumph. Maybe it was just the feeling of being free.